Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Eonics podcast, a podcast about software development, ways of working, and many more cool things. Once again in the studio today is Parsa. We just had a talk about DDD, and now we're going to talk about BDD.
Yes.
So let's dive right into it, right? So
yeah, they sound the same, but they're really not.
They are different, right? So can you explain to me what BDD is?
Behaviour Driven Development. It's simple. The way to test using plain English.
All right, that sounds cool.
And the reason for that is so that business people can get involved with testing.
That also sounds very convenient.
Yeah, it is, because it's normally before they came, like business people, they come up with scenarios, and then no, not before, but with BDD, sorry, it was a mistake. Yeah, with BDD, people, like business people, can come up with scenarios, and then we can just implement the scenarios.
Yeah. All right. So that does sound very simple conceptually, but I'm guessing that in practice it is more difficult.
In
right?
practice, it's difficult, because the whole point of having BDD scenarios, BDD tests, is since we're using plain English to test, it has to be very readable.
Yeah.
So sometimes people forget that. So in theory, business people should write the BDD scenarios, but in reality, it's developers who do that eventually.
Yeah, so are we not then defeating the whole purpose of doing BDD?
Yes, of course. But then we get closer to business people using BDD scenarios, because they at least come up with scenarios on a notepad.
Yeah.
Or we might say old school way. But then we would kind of translate that into our scenarios. But in theory, what developers should do, they should create sentences, usable sentences, and then the business people should use this sentence to literally write tests using those implemented sentences. So in BDD, for people to get an understanding, in BDD, you create sentences and you give it an implementation using a method. So you have a sentence, let's say, given a person in the database, and then that sentence has an implementation in the method, and the method uses the data given in the sentence, like we say given JP in the database, and then we use JP, we put it in the database in the implementation.
Yeah, exactly. So you're basically creating a sentence with like placeholders for data, and then you can use the data to...
We have placeholders in the sentences, exactly.
Okay, and I think that there's a like a default structure that you're using in the BDD, like is the given when then structure when creating your test scenarios.
Yeah, we always had those structures in our tests. We have in any test, even unit tests, we have given, when, and then.
Yeah,
but then this is actually written.
Yeah, and I think it's
in
given
plain English. Yeah.
It's a bit more explicit, right? So
it's explicit. So we have three types of sentences in BDD. We have given, when, and then. So the given is your given data in already created data in the database that you want to use in the method or whatever the component that you want to test.
Yeah.
The when part actually executes the
action,
the component, the operation, and the then part these are the assertions.
Yeah.
If you will, you assert that the certain result came out of that that service that you just executed in a way you want it to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So are you actually doing BDD on a unit level, or is the BDD more on the integration level?
So in the previous podcast we talked about DDD, and that's the domain driven design, and we have domains there, and in BDD we test domains end to end from input to output.
All right.
But since the output is basically interfaces, the output is really not connected to anything. We want to test the domain itself. We don't want to attach it to a database. Then we should mock the output.
Yeah, so you can actually read the data that's coming out of it.
That's coming. So
you can
read the data that we give in the given part of the scenarios.
Yeah. No, I can imagine that. So I think that would be one of the benefits of using DDD, that the entire domain is extracted from implementation, so you can easily test it.
Exactly.
Because that is one of the things that I always find to be quite annoying if you're doing integration tests for, let's say, a Spring Boot application. Then you need all those mocking and maybe spin up a Spring Boot test container and yada. But you don't need to do that then if you're doing DDD.
No, you don't have to.
Or at least not for the domain part.
Yeah.
And typically, in my opinion, you mostly need to test your domain logic and not necessarily, I don't know, wiring or getters and setters and stuff like that. So I think that the domain part of your application is typically also the part that you want to test most.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So at ING, you are doing the BDD on the domain part mostly.
Yes, and but you can also do it in separate parts. It doesn't have to be necessarily the domain, but yeah, that's the most useful part.
That's the most useful part. All right. So can you tell me about the complexities here? Because on a conceptual level, I can understand, okay, you're writing 3 sentences given when then, and you need something to parse it and to, do something with whatever is given to you. Do some mocking, I don't know, put data in database and whatever is there. Depending on your use case, obviously. But I can imagine there's more complexities than that.
Yeah, there are a lot of complexities with BDD scenarios. If we don't take the mocking into account, just the BDD scenarios itself, the sentences, the plain English spoken sentences, the complexity is within the readability of those sentences. So if that's why we get like business people to write the scenarios, because they don't have any understanding of the technical point.
I think that's good, right?
That's very good, yeah, because there are instances where the developer writes the sentences, but then it comes off as technical.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't want that to happen.
So you do basically want to start with a business person to define, okay, this is the scenario and this is the required outcome. And
exactly.
Then maybe you want to translate that into a bit more technical sentences so you can implement.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay. And is there any complexity in the actual implementation, or is that fairly straightforward?
No, it's very straightforward and very clean, to be honest. Previously, the tests I used to write, it used to become messy.
Yeah.
Because you had to come up with test methods, and then it was like basically unit testing normally. Yeah. But now you have a structured way. You have sentences, and you can use those sentences. You have step definitions, steps as in the steps of the BDD scenarios.
Yeah.
And then everything is neat. You don't have to complicate things with normal testing.
All right, good. So the complexity is more in the organization than in the technical details.
Yes, sort of. Yeah.
All right. So what kind of framework are you guys using to do this, or is there no framework?
Cucumber.
Is that the only thing that you can use, or are there other?
That's the only thing that I know of.
Yeah. All right.
So Cucumber tests, because we're using Java.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is basically, it is on top of JUnit, I suppose.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Unit's 5, I think.
Okay.
Not 4, but I'm not sure.
Is it also something that you would typically do in a test-driven development style? As in, would you first define your behaviors and then write your implementations, the actual business logic, or is that not?
No, we don't start with writing implementation. I think it's not a very useful approach to start with implementing your business logic first and then go to the test. It's always better to start with the test, because then in writing your test, you would realize missed this part of the business logic. I missed that part, and then you would come up with a better and like even for some other developer who wants to develop the implementation of the behavior of the service, if they read the sentences, it would be much easier. Even for myself, I find it like super easy, because previously I used to read tests, like normal tests within the method. Like I had to read code to understand the business logic, and then there are like sometimes hundreds of test methods you have to read. And then sometimes you have to take notes off of them. But with the BDD, you can easily just read sentences, plain English sentences, and you can have a better understanding of the business.
What's going on there? Yeah, no, I can really imagine that it's making a lot more sense, because it's on the logical level and it's not on the technical level. Because
exactly. But to be honest, if the sentences are created poorly, if we don't have like a nice sentences and it diverts more towards technicality, then it would become confusing. Yeah, and I mentioned a couple of examples in the workshop.
I kind of remember that.
Yeah,
I think we were also kind of having a discussion
over it. Yeah,
that was nice. So, but I think what you just said, that really makes sense. That you start by asking the non-technical business people to come up with the scenarios and then try to translate those into actual BDD sentences, or more of like a technical, instead of doing it the other way around, right? So if you start with, hey, I already have the code and now I'm trying to wrap a test case around it in BDD style, then I think you are missing the point.
Yeah.
All right. So suppose that, you want to get into BDD. Any advice or first steps that somebody would have to take to start with that, or is it like a very low level entry?
I think it would just come up with the right sentences, very readable sentences.
All right, but maybe more to like the lower level. Suppose that I am a person, actually I am that person, I am only used to writing unit tests and maybe some integration tests on your REST endpoints and stuff. Suppose I want to start doing BDD. What would I do? Where would I start?
In what context? Where do you start? All
right. Suppose. Let me take a very practical example. Yeah. Okay, so we have our own application here. It's written in Spring Boot. It has the new versions of whatnot. I think it's Spring Boot 3 something in Java 21, and just building REST endpoints. But we're not doing a whole lot of testing yet.
Yeah.
So suppose I want to get started there. What would I have to do to actually, add BDD there? Because
I think it's the same as it's not the same as unit tests in that sense, but. The concepts are the same. Anyone who writes tests, they can easily convert to BDD scenarios, BDD tests. But the complications is that these sentences are separate, and they are in separate classes, separate parts.
Yeah.
And when you write unit tests, you basically have access to everything you want within the class.
Yeah.
But in BDD scenarios, these sentences are the parts given when and then are in separate places, and they have to be connected through something. So it can be an object, it can be something that you have to come up with within your design. So I think that's the complications, because, for instance, let me give you an example. You, in the given part, you put data in the assumed database. It can be an in-memory database, a static data. Static data. It can be static data. But then you need this data somewhere.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, but the when sentences are somewhere else. It's not in the same class. It can be in the same class, but it's not neat.
All right.
It's you have to come up with a design so that these are separate, in the right place. And then so the when sentences, the when sentences should have access to these database.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to come up with your own
So these
design.
things, you're saying things like, okay, it is neat, right? So that is obviously something that maybe is opinionated or it's not. So where do I find like information on how to design my BDD cases properly? Is that like
there is a guideline.
Yeah.
There is this thing called step defs that like you can use, like these are the classes that you define the steps there, and then but it's a design thing, not necessarily a BDD thing. You want your then sentences to be somewhere, and you want your when sentences to be somewhere. It's gonna be a huge class if you want to put everything together.
Yeah, no, of course, but it always helps to have some best practices if you want to get started. Right?
Yeah, there are definitely. You can if you read on BDD, it always like there are some rules that you can follow.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Would you also advise using BDD outside of a DDD context?
So you can always use BDD. It's a test. It's a normal type of using plain English.
No, I can understand that.
Yeah.
But,
you can use it everywhere.
You can also duplicate your
you
code.
Can use it. You can use it to do integration tests. It doesn't necessarily have to be end to end or.
All right.
Yeah. But the good thing about BDD is that these sentences could be used in a lot of places.
So you can.
So in unit testing, you have the given part. You give some data that you create, but in BDD you can create a sentence. The sentence does the same thing, but then you can use it everywhere, anywhere you want.
So it's like more of a reusable
structure. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it sounds like something with mostly only benefits. So everybody use it.
Yeah, not everybody, but
everybody should use it.
But the thing is, everybody, true. But then if they use it, still not a lot of people do it for the purpose it was built for. The purpose was to get business people to join the BDD scenarios, to write the BDD scenarios.
Yeah, all right.
But they write it somewhere else, and then we have to use it.
Okay, well, so it's important to do it in conjunction with the business. With the business. But even if they don't do it, it sounds like it's better than just doing normal unit or integration tests.
You can always follow the same path you were doing before by using normal tests. But it's always better to have business people because they have business knowledge.
Yeah, we love the business people, man.
I personally do, especially our business guy in our squad.
Oh, no sucking up here, man. Come on. Huh? So that's good. All right, great. So the key takeaway is use it, particularly if you have the business people that are involved. If not, then it still has some benefits, but not really.
No, it does. But even translation, even if the business people write it somewhere and then we translate it into our own sentences that we implemented, it's a fine translation. It's like easy translation.
Yeah.
Whereas if you want to code that scenario.
No, I can understand that. Great. Thank you so much again for being here and explaining about this.
Thanks for having me.
I think it's very interesting and useful for a lot of people. Yeah. So, dear listeners, thank you very much again for listening to us. If you find these topics to be interesting, please follow us on our social channels and see you next time. Bye.